You know, when they said they buried their dead 10 miles outside of town in this episode, I was just thinking, who is the person who got stuck with the job dragging bodies 10 miles outside of town? Poor f***ing bastard. Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well. I am here to review the latest episode of The Last of Us on HBO. Or I was going to say I guess it is technically HBO. It still has the whole HBO thing at the top, but it's Max. Don't ask me to make sense of it. It's dumb regardless. Anyways, the Max series The Last of Us, episode 3 of season 2, titled The Path. As per usual, I am going to be full spoilers on the episode, but I will not spoil anything from the game going forward until I give a clear spoiler warning towards the end of this video. I'm not going to actually have a ton in that regard in this episode. I will have a little bit, so I'll give a warning when I get to that point. Just, setting us all up for the expectations of what I'm going to be talking about. But I'm going to put this right up front for this episode because, as many of you know, if you've been watching my reviews of this season so far, I have been fairly okay to mixed on these episodes, and then if you watch my reviews after I start discussing the comparisons to the game, I'm a little bit more negative, and I say that right now I really, really liked this episode quite a lot. I think, honestly, this is my favorite episode of the season so far. Definitely not of the series so far. I still think that is the gay episode. I'll just call it the gay episode, even though I know it's a terrible way to discuss it, but the gay episode of season 1 is still my favorite of this series, frankly, overall. But this was a really, really strong episode, and I think did a really good job of allowing us to have emotional fallout and really deal with the emotion of what happened last episode, which I think a lot of viewers are going to need, and yet not let it wallow in that and give us a direct way forward and even a little bit of joy and hope and just happiness, weirdly, in this episode, which is not something I immediately expected this show to do. And I think that was really, really smart because, if you played the game, and I'm not going to spoil plot stuff from the game, but the game is fairly dark immediately after Joel's death, and it kind of stays that note for quite a while, not completely, but for a decent amount of time. So for the show to kind of give us the darkness and then turn it a little bit more towards not necessarily hope, but like giving us a point, a directive, and not just focusing so directly on anger and revenge, but giving us humanity within this, I think as actually fleshing out a lot of the more mixed feelings that I was having about the show in previous episodes. It doesn't completely override my complicated feelings on especially the game-related stuff in the show. However, just taking this episode on its own, especially since it doesn't have a lot of stuff to compare to the game, this is, for the most part, pretty original material. I think that this was just a really, really strong episode, and I'm going to be really curious to see people's reaction to this episode, mostly because I feel like a lot of the audience's reaction, just having looked at it after this to last week's episode, was fairly similar to the game, but in the game you can just keep playing, whereas in the show we have had a week, and I saw a lot of people online talking about whether they were even feeling that they wanted to continue with the show, especially because a lot of people really felt like the show was Ellie and Joel, that they were the centerpiece of the entire show's appeal, and I don't necessarily even disagree with that. And I think this episode went a really long way to trying to show people, like, no, there's still stuff here that you will want to find some appeal in, to get drawn into. And I think it was just so smartly done. And so my mixed feelings on how they handled other stuff aside, this was a really, really great episode and has me fully on board for what they're going to be doing going forward, even with my reservations on some of their choices that they've already made. But I've been talking in kind of vague sentiments here. Let's actually get into the specifics. We start off the episode with just immediately after the events of last week's episode, and I really love Tommy getting a moment with Joel. If there's one thing that the game doesn't do, it doesn't give us a ton of time with Tommy as a character, and the show really, I think, gives him a lot more time to articulate throughout, in this episode in particular, his own personal feelings and relationship to Joel. We got a little bit of it in the game, but here it really get the sense of like he has his own individual relationship with Joel that he's wrestling with. And I really love that moment of him saying, say hi to Sarah for me, and bring it all the way back to the pilot episode and what happened with Sarah there. And I think that emotional tether and connection, and him having that emotional connection and tether to Joel that even Ellie wouldn't even really know, because I think she's aware of Sarah, but she doesn't really know Sarah, I think was a really smart way to draw out Tommy's particular connection. And then Ellie waking up in the hospital and just screaming, I think that she was just giving the emotion that the audience felt at the end of last week, and it was so visceral. Bella just nailed that. It was visceral for me watching it, and I've had time to deal with the emotion of Joel ever dying since the game years ago, and her, and I'm saying her again, meaning Ellie, not Bella, who has different pronouns, but her emotional reaction just it really just drew me in, and I felt it. Like, I really, really felt it, and I think that the show needed to acknowledge that, like, scream that people had, because I think a lot of people after last week just felt numb, as well they should have, but I think that this just allowed that emotional catharsis, and really great. I also loved, I usually don't stick through the opening credits, I usually skip by them, but I stayed through just to see, and there is no more Joel and Ellie at the end of the title sequence, which is a bit dark. So if you missed skipping the title, or if you did skip the title sequence, yeah, it's just Ellie now in that opening title sequence, which is kind of sad to see. And then the rest of this is really just focusing on the ramifications for Jackson and Ellie in specific after the fallout of last week's episode. Not just with Joel, but the fact that Jackson just got torn apart. And I really, really liked it. There's a couple tiny little nits to pick that I have with this. There'll be one immediately, and there's another one in just a few minutes. But they're like very, very minor and not at all consequential. But when I was like, that's a weird choice there. But overall, I thought all of this was just really, really great, and building us to Ellie's decision to, again, I'm spoiling the whole episode here, go after Abby by herself, or with Dina, I should say. Starting off, we get Ellie leaving the hospital, and we get that wonderful little scene with Gail. This does bring me into my one little nitpick here. It's been 3 months, and Ellie has been stuck in the hospital this entire time. I could buy it to a degree, in the sense that, like, she maybe had been on suicide watch and had been healing for a significant amount of time. But 3 months does seem like a lot, especially since we don't get the sense that she's even been to her own home in that 3-month time period. And it's just one of those, like, I feel like they probably would have. It's a small enough, tight-knit community that I feel like maybe they would have let her go. Again, maybe she was on suicide watch or something like that. There was a little bit of a question mark on my head that I wish the show would just give me a little bit more nibble of for an explanation, just so I wasn't thinking about it. But again, it's a minor nitpick. It doesn't really pull me too much out of the episode. But the scene with Gail was great, but you can clearly tell that Ellie is not telling the whole truth with Gail. And Bella plays it so well, as does, I'm blanking on Gail's actress. I'm just thinking of Moira the entire time. But they're both really playing it well, because both of them know that they're bullshitting each other, and they're just kind of going through the motions. But you know that Gail can't really press, because Ellie's not going to open with her, and Gail knows that if she presses, Ellie's just going to close up more. So I think that it was just so smartly played by, you can just clearly tell both of them know that they're bullshitting, but that there wasn't much more they could do. And Gail just being like, yeah, no, if everyone was as healthy as you, I would be fine as a therapist. So a really, really wonderful scene. And I love the emotion that we get with Ellie going back home and seeing Joel's stuff, getting his gun, and crying over his outfits. I love that, and I loved when Dina shows up. Ellie hides her emotions. There's a sense of, like, her never willing to be vulnerable with anybody. She has closed herself off so much, and Dina breaks through that from time to time, but not completely. And I like that we get little hints of this, of, like, Ellie is willing to open up to Dina more, trust Dina more, especially as earned by the end of the episode, but has not fully opened up to her. And I just love that, like, little bits of through line here. The Dina scene was also really wonderful. I just have to say this. Dina is great. Like, I love Dina in the game. Dina in the show is phenomenal. Like, I just love every scene that she's in. She's so good. The cookie bit being like, I did this as a peace offering because I'm about to make you angry was so good. I also love just a production note here. Those cookies looked really good. Mostly whenever you see shows, when they have cookies or something like that, they just went out to, like, the Ralph's and bought, like, a free cookies or whatever. Those cookies looked rather good. So I kind of made me hungry for the cookies. I'm hyper focusing on the cookies here. But I loved their interplay, and Ellie just going at her being like, how dare you? I don't care. I would have gone after them. And Dina giving legitimate reasons why, like, look, I wanted to tell you, but they said not to make you angry. And I would have thought, like, oh, if we are going after them, might as well let them get there, because then we'll know where they are. And it was really, really smart. And maybe be like, yeah, I buy it completely. And I buy that would be enough to make Ellie a little less angry, like still angry, but a little less angry at understanding the logic that Dina had, because it wasn't just that Dina was like, oh, they told me to protect you, because Ellie would have rejected, like, don't protect me, fuck that. But Dina actually had a logistical reason for why she didn't tell Ellie that is what Ellie actually listened to. So just great understanding of both characters, and Dina understanding how much she gets Ellie. And again, just it lands just how much Dina understands Ellie throughout this episode that really, really works. We get that quick scene with Tommy and Ellie, and Tommy saying we have to bring it to a vote to the council. I do like that Tommy states, like, don't talk to me like I didn't know my own brother. It's, again, something from the game, and this isn't spoilers, really. It's just, like, we do get a sense that Tommy has feelings about, you know, Joel's death in the game, but it's really more in terms of, like, how he centers around Ellie to a large degree. Not completely, but to a large degree. And here I like that he sets his own boundaries, and very clearly, like, I am going to, like, don't talk to me like I didn't know him. And you know that he is completely on Ellie's side, especially when we get to the council scene later. But he, you know, he has to go about it in his own way. So I really like that. Just they both have similar intentions, but they are going about it in different ways and have different feelings about it to the degree of how they want to go through the council. So I thought that was really smart. And then the council scene was very interesting to me. First off, I just have to say, I forget his character's name, but he just spoke really quickly. There was an actor in this scene, the one who spoke about, we need to forgive and forget, mercy, played by actor Hiro Kanagawa. He's one of those actors who's just been in everything, like literally everything. I think most recently I saw him in Star Trek Discovery, but he's been in literally anything and everything. Like, pick a genre TV show or even a bunch of movies and stuff, and he's been in it. So just weird to see him. Was he in, maybe I'm forgetting, was he in season 1 as a character in Jackson? I just forgot. He's a great actor and I love him. It's just so strange to see him in such a bit part in this show. Like, he isn't a character actor. He just shows up in fairly, you know, small to middle range parts within different TV shows. But like, this is such a one-off character that I was like, did I just forget? Because it's so noticeable that he's an actor that I really like. And he just so has such a small role here. Maybe he'll come back later, but I don't recall in any sense. Anyways, this scene was really interesting to me on multiple levels. I love that Seth, the homophobe, is the one who stands up and said, no, I'm going to stand up for Joel. And it gets at this idea of, like, you know, Joel, Ellie is surprised that he is on her side. And I think that's kind of just a shocking reveal, but it also kind of gets to the subtle thing of, like, Seth's viewpoint isn't necessarily entirely correct either, and he is much more viscerally feeling the rage. He's like, I don't even want to say viscerally feeling, but he is more top level, just thinking with emotion and gut instinct, which kind of homophobes to a degree do. They're very, like, base level, like, not having empathy and just like, yeah, let's get him, let's be aggressive and angry. Like, and I think that he is showcasing a more surface level version of an emotion that Ellie, I think, more deeply feels and more emotionally feels and more more complicated because of her direct relationship with Joel and how complicated that relationship was. And so Seth is a very similar feeling in a much more simplistic way, in a much more top level, uncomplex way. And I like that we get to see his feelings, and I like that we get to see the rest of the town's feelings on this. Not only is it just like articulating every single argument that we get, it's like, hey, forgive and forget. Hey, we have more important things to worry about. No, we need to go and get them. But it's, again, showcasing a more, communistic, even anarchistic, frankly, even though there's technically a council, but there's different ways you can run anarchism. Anyways, this isn't a discussion for that. But I like that the show is showcasing that without vilifying it. And we can showcase the limits and problems with it, especially as it relates to Ellie's feelings about it. But I like that it's not, it would be very easy for a show like this to just vilify a system like this. And it's so rare, especially in post-apocalyptic fiction. Because post-apocalyptic fiction often just is like, everyone's at each other's throats, we're all going to kill each other, and we're all going to go to hell. It's like, no, the show is just showing the different, like, there's fascist systems that we clearly get hinted at the end of this episode, but then people form more egalitarian societies as well. And post-apocalypse wouldn't just all be like, we're the Walking Dead, we're all going to kill each other sort of thing. Like, no, people form communities. And I really like that this show is showing it without vilifying it. Well, even being understanding with its flaws and how it can affect certain people. Like, because even anarchist systems, as an anarchist myself, are not perfect. No human system is. So I really, really like that. I also really loved Ellie's speech, because I was sitting here being like, I know the theme of the game. I'm not going to spoil the theme of the game for anyone here, but it's like, I even knowing what I know about the game, like, I'm like, yeah, Ellie's speech convinces me about justice and us. And you see that this is actually a very well thought out argument on her part, which I really liked because I'm like, of all the arguments, that's the one that would have gotten me to vote yes, even if I disagreed at the time. I don't necessarily know how I would have voted in the moment, but like that one would have got me. You know, I'm always here for the rah communistic sort of view, community view, and that's when I'm like, yeah, justice needs to be served, and we need to show that we care about each other. And I thought that was a legitimate argument. You know, and I love that Gail points it out later in the scene with Tommy, you know that that's not what Ellie actually believes, but you understand that she has, like, thought it through logically because of what Jessie told her earlier on, like, no one votes for angry. And it was a legitimately good argument. So I really adored that moment for her. And then obviously she gets voted down. And so she's let down by, and I love that it kind of goes to her own argument. She feels let down by the community. She feels let down by these people who are supposed to stand by her, she feels. And so she's like, all right, I'm not going to stand by anyone else. I'm going to go and do this on my own. And I really like that. It's like subtly, like, even though she logically doesn't necessarily buy this argument, like she's using it as a logical argument, and I'm sure she feels it on some level, but it's not the main one she would argue if she was speaking right from the heart. But you see that sort of counterbalances by what she actually feels in terms of them letting her down. So loved all of that. But I love, again, the scene where Dina shows up and just is like, all right, this is the plan. This is what we're doing. And I'm like, the chemistry between these two is so good. Like, it is so good. And I'm not even someone necessarily for, like, courtship stuff. I'm here for like lesbian romance, always here for that, or I guess bisexual romance, because Dina's complicated. Anyways, like, you can clearly tell that they have chemistry, but I just really liked just their chemistry off of each other. It's just so freaking good. Loved it. I there's not much more to say other than, like, I just like that Dina gets Ellie, and Ellie's just being like, I didn't know if I could come to you, but thank you, and now you know, and Dina just being so supportive. Love it. Just absolutely great. I also really liked the Tommy and Gail scene of Gail being like, that kid's a liar, and like, some people are on a path. Kind of a dark point of view for a therapist. You can see that, like, Ellie's gonna do what Ellie's gonna do. I don't necessarily know if I agree with her that, like, it's more nature over nurture. I don't think that's necessarily the show's thesis either. But it is one of those things that's like, okay, there is a conversation here about, like, is Ellie just gonna be set on the path? Is she gonna do this regardless? And you know, where is it going to lead her, and what's it going to do to change or possibly change that course, or is there not going to be a way to do that? So I think that the show's sort of presenting that as an interesting theme. I don't necessarily think it comes down on Gail's side, but I think that Gail's sort of certainly making the most compelling argument at the moment, which I think is interesting in terms of the thematics of the show. So really like all of that. Really interesting. This is where I'm gonna have to couch a little bit of a few things here. It was interesting to see that group that grows up and gets clearly killed by the WLF, the group that we know Abby is a part of, and maybe even have been killed by Abby. I certainly have my thoughts on that. I like that it sets up the WLF as a threat, and even more Abby as a potential threat. I have a couple more things that I'll put in my game spoiler section, so I'll just leave that there for now. But I will just put this out here in this part. I liked it. I like that as an interesting setup. It's an interesting complication, an interesting building for the WLF. So I actually really enjoyed what they were building there, even though it ends in child murder. But I think, and I don't particularly always enjoy child murder. I mean, I never really enjoy child murder. You know what I'm saying? But I think sometimes shows are too quick to use child murder as like a quick get to. Here, I actually think it lends really well to where the show is trying to build up the anger at Abby, build up the anger at the WLF. So all very interesting stuff on that front of things. And then everything after this, where Dina and Ellie go out, loved, again, their chemistry is so good. I was literally sitting when they're in their tents, and I'm like, are you guys just gonna fuck already? Like, please. I'm not necessarily one for sex scenes or anything like that, but I'm like, come on, this is where this feels like this is heading. And it's interesting they didn't. I really thought the scene was gonna go where they were gonna talk about, like, well, how would you rate my kiss? Well, I need to have another, Dina was going to say, well, let me give you another kiss so that you can rate that one. Maybe I can do better. And then it was going to end up with them kissing or making out or whatever. Didn't go that route. So I think they're playing a little bit of a longer game with their chemistry, which is interesting. Not necessarily a negative thing, but they're going a little bit of a slower burn, which I think is smart ultimately. As much as I love their chemistry, I think there's so much good in their chemistry that you can draw it out a little bit more and kind of get us invested. And I think, again, it goes to what I was saying at the top of this review. it is allowing us to feel a sense of kind of something anticipatory and joyful and good even, and happy even. It's the show isn't sitting in misery porn, which it very easily could have done immediately after last week's episode. No, this episode actually had some stuff that made me laugh and feel good about like things in life. And I should even go back a little bit. Like, it was good to see Jackson rebuilding. Like, after it got torn apart last episode, it was good to see Jackson be rebuilt and feeling like, oh, there's still something good here. Like, even after, like, life goes on. Joel is dead, but life goes on, and they're still good. It's not just everything is sad now. And I really like that, especially for, again, without spoiling, stuff that I know comes later. I actually think that provides a really nice gradient of feeling for what the show is going to go into. Because if it had just stayed misery porn, I think it wouldn't have come off, as strong in this episode or even what's to come. So yeah, just really, really good. I just tonally, I thought this was superb. I really have to like just lay that flat out. I thought that was really, really great. Nothing but effusive praise on the tonal aspect of the show, and just really this episode generally. Oh, the only other note that I did want to say is just a minor nitpick, and this is a minor nitpick. I joked about a little bit at the top. It's the fact that Joel's grave and the grave of all the other people that died in the Jackson attack are 10 miles outside of town, which was weird to me. Maybe it's to like protect people from like if they rise from the dead, if they're zombies, but that's not a thing in the Last of Us universe. So I was just sitting here thinking like, why would you bury them 10 miles outside of town? Why? Number one, the effort to like bring all their bodies that far away. Number two, the fact that like if people want to go and visit their loved ones, they have to like go 10 miles outside of town in unprotected territory where they might run into more of the clickers and such, like more infected. So it's just one of those, like, I think the reason was they wanted to have a nice shot for Ellie to have on her way out of the town. Again, you can maybe even argue some logistics of, like, you know, they don't have enough space in Jackson. It's the only place where the ground was soft enough for them to bury the bodies. They had to get them out, the bodies outside of town as they were rebuilding. Like, there are reasons you could give me that would justify it to a degree, but it was one of those, like, sort of, like, weird logic things in my brain that I'm like, I wish we gotten a better explanation for that, because that feels weird, like a weird thing to have done. But regardless, whatever. It's not. It's a nit to pick. Not really a episode breaking thing. But then we get to Seattle, and we clearly see the guy from Abby's group is in the Seattle Needle, which, by the way, is very funny for me because I used to live in Seattle, and I actually used to work in the Museum of Popular Culture, which is the museum literally like right next to the Space Needle there. And so I was sort of like, oh, hey, I used to work right there. I've been there. So yeah, it was just a little funny for me. It was the same thing that happened when I played The Last of Us 2 game, because you get to walk around Seattle in the game and they recreate certain specific areas of Seattle in the game. It's not a one-for-one to Seattle, but it has some one-to-one areas. And so it was just one of those weird like, oh, hey, this is uncanny. So it was a similar thing in the show. Outside of Los Angeles, which is like ubiquitous in Hollywood films to a large degree, I haven't really lived in cities that are so like uniquely tied into a location in a show like this. So that was kind of just fun for me. That's just a me thing. But yeah, we get to see that the WLF is there, clearly a strong group, a big group, and also very militaristic, I should say, and clearly doing some fucked up shit potentially. And Abby is clearly, or at least Abby's crew is involved in that in some way. So clearly setting us up from very interesting stakes going forward. Also, I should mention, I like Seth showing up and giving the rifle to Ellie. That was a nice beat and moment for their arc. Not even sure if Seth will ever show up again. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But it was a nice way to resolve all of that. Yeah, so all that's really good. I don't necessarily think there's anything else. No, there's nothing else that I have to say outside of wanting to discuss some game-related stuff. So if you have not played the game and don't want any spoilers for the game, you can jump off here. But overall, I'll say this. This was a great episode of The Last of Us and has me very excited for where we're going, even despite my misgivings with some of the stuff in the first 2 episodes of this season. Most of it to do with game-related comparisons, which if you watch those reviews, you already know. And I'm not going to reiterate them in this section, just to say. Let us talk game comparisons here. So full spoilers on the game here. I'm not going to reiterate my points on Abby, and I discussed all of them last week, and all of those points still stand. I still am not a huge fan of the choice to reveal a lot of Abby's backstory in the last few episodes. However, I am very curious, given how they have set up this episode for us dealing with the WLF, because we get to see the group that the WLF kill in this episode. We actually get a little scene with them, and we see this kid, and I forget the name of the group, but I believe it is the fundamentalist religious group that Ian Alexander's trans masculine character from the game. I don't know who's got cast as that character in the show, but I know Ian Alexander played the character in the game. That's the group that they're from, and clearly they have their own fucked up shit in their own society. But we get little hints of it in this scene, but we mostly get a sense of like a father and a kid having a decent relationship and them getting killed, which sets up the WLF as a really dark and dangerous fucked up group, while humanizing this group that we know will have more complications down the line, which is very interesting because it's setting up a very similar dynamic with what we feel about Abby at this point in the series. We don't know a lot about Abby, and we don't know a lot about the WLF, and we don't know a lot about this fundamental religious group, but we get a little bit more to get invested in them. And it also sets up the WLF, rightly so, as a fucked up fascist group, because the WLF are a fucked up fascist terrible group and need to be stopped because they're literally murdering children. But we also get the association of the group with Abby by Ellie and Dina here, which we don't necessarily know if that's the case in the show. And so it's an interesting thing of like, now we're complicating the culture that Abby comes from, but not necessarily Abby, but getting assumptions that Ellie and Dina have towards Abby based on the society that she comes from. So interesting setup on that front. Like it's an interesting way for us to get into the, to complicating Abby in an interesting way that does not replicate the game. And like I said, I still have very mixed feelings, mostly negative feelings about front-loading us with Abby's backstory. However, bringing us into the story this way with the WLF, which is different than how we get into them in the game. We just sort of encounter them initially on their own. Not necessarily, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we necessarily see the ramifications on the other group. It's an interesting way for us to get into that story. So I think that that's it's an interesting thing to do. So curious to see how ultimately that's going to play out. I ultimately, like I said, there's not a ton I have to say. I'm more curious to see how it's going to play out, but it is one that intrigues me. And I don't have immediate, like, visceral negative feelings about it like I did from the changes that they made so far. I have much more like, interesting. Curious to see where you're going to go with that. Anyways, that's everything that I wanted to talk about. So what did you think of this episode, Last of Us Part 2? I guess Season 2, Part 2, whatever you want to call it. I really liked this episode. I thought it was a great one coming off of an episode that had much more, I don't even want to say mixed necessarily, complicated feelings on. But I love this one. It has me jumping right back into the rest of the series. I am curious to see what the wider reaction to this episode is going to be, because I know for a fact there were a bunch of people that were like, I'm going to give this show one more episode, but I don't necessarily know if I'm in for the ride after what happened to Joel. And I'm curious to see what the reaction is going to be. My feeling, I hope the reaction would be, I'm in for the ride, because I see that this isn't just gonna be misery, porn, anger, revenge story. Like, there's some gradients of things going on here. And I think that's what the show is going for. And I think that's an interesting thing, because they very clearly have the potential to lose a lot of people, even more than they probably already lost a few people after Joel's death of last week's episode. So very, very curious to see what the reaction to this week's episode is going to be. But for me, it was generally positive. What did you think of it, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. But beyond all of that, my friends, live long and prosper.